What's going on, guys? It's Mr. Collins here bringing you episode 3 of my podcast, Let's Talk History. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a dive into the life of Abraham Lincoln and studying why he is everybody's favorite president. Let's jump into it. All right, guys. We want to dive a little bit into the early life of Abraham Lincoln. I'm here with one of my students, Nick. Introduce yourself, Nick.
Nick.
All right, so we want to go into talking about the early life of Abraham Lincoln, starting off with when he was born, February 12th, 1809. He was born to a pretty poor family in Hodgensville, Kentucky. And as he grew up in life, he really wasn't a fan of manual labor. He really liked to just sit around the house, read books such as the Bible, Aesop's Fables. As he grew older, once he got old enough to move out, he moved to Illinois and got jobs, various jobs around the city, around the town, and actually ended up meeting in 1835 his first love by the name of Anne Rutledge. Anne Rutledge was very sweet on Abraham Lincoln, really enjoyed his company, and it was actually really tragic because Anne actually ended up dying of an illness. And this really hurt Abraham Lincoln to the core. He had to be on a watch for a long time because he was so depressed after that.
Yeah, and later on in 1839, he met Mary Todd. And later on in their relationship, they had 4 kids together. And
only one of those kids ended up living to adulthood, Robert. So after we get through the early life of Lincoln, that really gets him into his political aspirations and his political career. So let's go ahead and dive into that. All right, guys. So let's go ahead and move on to the second part of Lincoln's life, which is his political career and aspirations.
Well, Abraham Lincoln, he was elected in 1860 in a 4-way election between Breckinridge, Douglas, and Bell, and also himself. And even though he had nothing more than a second grade education, he won with 180 electoral votes.
So pretty impressive, especially coming off as the very first of his own party. So you got the election of 1860, got him as the very first Republican president elected, and on the cusp of what would be the Civil War of America. So in 1860, South Carolina secedes while this election is going on and ending, and becomes the first of many other southern states to secede over the issue of slavery. In 1862, Lincoln signs in the Emancipation Proclamation that frees all slaves in states of rebellion. And in 1863, July, after the Battle of Gettysburg, Lincoln shows up to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and he gives a 2-minute speech that just woos the whole crowd. He went on after a guy just got done giving a 2-hour-long speech, and the guy later sent him a letter saying basically that you accomplished more in 2 minutes than I could in 2 hours. So pretty impressive for a guy that just has not much more than a second grade education and is self-taught. So let's move on. All right, so moving on to the last section of Lincoln's life we're going to talk about today, and we have his assassination. It is really hard to compress even just his assassination into one story, but it is a very complex one and very interesting one at that. So you got a guy by the name of John Wilkes Booth. He was an actor and Confederate sympathizer, and he really was not a fan of Lincoln. If you look at a picture of Lincoln's second inaugural address, you can actually see Booth in the audience watching him and listening to him. Just days before Lincoln was assassinated at his own hands, John Wilkes Booth is in the crowd of another speech where he was talking about how we should be nice to the Confederacies that come back in and make sure we're nice to the slaves. And he really did not enjoy anything that Lincoln had to say about slavery or the issue that was the Civil War. So on April 14th, when Lincoln and Mary Todd and a few more of their friends show up to the Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. to watch a rendition of Our American Cousin, John Wilkes Booth sneaks in and goes through the presidential box and assassinates Lincoln in the back of the head.
And in 1814, although he was shot on that day, he didn't die until April 15th, the day later. And then John Wilkes Booth, he pretty much stabbed 2 guards and jumped off and broke his leg and then made not a very smooth escape.
No, not at all. He jumps out of the presidential booth after slicing Henry Rathbone's arm, who tried to protect Lincoln, and his spurs get caught in the American flag, and he hits the stage and says the Latin term Sic Semper Tyrannis, which again is Latin for to all tyrants the same, and makes his escape. He was later found and killed by Union soldiers, and the nation began its mourning over the loss of their beloved president. So that's us signing off.